Again, I appreciate everybody attending today. My name's Matt Sump. I'm here with Joe Julian from our office as well, who's our Cimco sales and support engineer. And we're going to be talking about what's new in Cimco 2022 version. But we're going to go over some of the user interface updates. We'll be going through licensing updates, features, going a deeper dive into Cimco Edit and the simulation enhancements and Backplot, as well as looking through MDC and a few more things that I think Joe probably didn't tell me about yet.
Awesome. Thanks, man. All right. So first of all, thanks everyone for joining. Much appreciated today, taking your time out of the day to come see what we've got here in the new version. So before we kind of get into the meat of the demonstration portion of the software, I did want to go over any of the back end and the UI changes that we've got in the new version here. So just to kind of start off, Cimco software beforehand has all been able to run on 32-bit systems in the past. Starting with the new version in 2022, it's all 64-bit. So you might see a little bit of functionality difference if you are installing on a 32-bit system. It still technically can run, but we definitely recommend it being installed on a 64-bit system moving forward here. We'll go over a few differences in that that kind of affect the database side of things as well if you are an MDC or an NC-based customer. But we just wanted to make sure that that was clear before we kind of started here. So the main benefit really of the 64-bit system, obviously, if you're kind of familiar with that type of architecture there, it does provide a lot of performance and reliability improvements, especially on the editor and the MDC-Max side. So if you're doing anything in the data collection, a lot of those windows that kind of took a little bit to reload in the background, we're going to see a whole lot more of a improvement on the usability side of things there. So very excited about that. We also, like Matt mentioned as well, we are defaulting to the new dark mode. So that could be changed if you're kind of used to the light version and we want to stay that way. That could be changed back to the light version in the client config. So we'll be going over that in the demonstration portion, but that's a main feature that you'll definitely see right off the bat. So also the installer is no longer MSI based. So essentially what that means is we've kind of seen a little bit of issues with having to run as an administrator in different IT environments, things like that. So we have had some issues with it being MSI based. The new version in 2022 is no longer using that at all. So we're going to see a whole lot less issues on the installation process, which we're very excited about as well. Probably the biggest change that we've seen so far is the installation location change. We've had a lot of kind of gripes about that in the past with it being installed directly to the root of C. So within the new version, they've completely changed that. We're going from C Cimco to C program files. So I'll go ahead and switch to my virtual server here. So previously we're going to C Cimco, and then you remember you had the Cimco Edit, the MDC-Max, all of your different Cimco products here. Now we're installing directly to the program file section here as well. So all your products will show up inside of that program files window. Additionally, we had if you're familiar with the installation process in Cimco, there's always that checkbox to place that configuration in your install directory. That's changed as well. That's actually going into the app data folder on the computer. So what that'll do is it'll allow users to have their own set of settings based off of their user account in Windows. So my demo system, that's my user account on my server. So my settings for all of these applications, let's say for my Cimco Edit, my configuration with all my settings and all that, that's going to go actually directly in that roaming folder here. So we'll do a demonstration that we can see if we do any configuration changes, we can see the timestamp on that file change. So we'll go over a quick demonstration of that here as well. So that's kind of listed out right there, that next portion with the settings. It is a hidden folder by default. So you'll have to go into your view settings in your file explorer and go ahead and actually hit that checkbox to show any hidden folders to get to those settings. The main version of the database, it's actually obsoleting support for Windows 7. So if you're running any Cimco software, like let's say your NC base or your MDC-Max or anything like that, if you are using that on a Windows 7 computer, the new version of 2022 is obsoleting support for Windows 7. So you'll have to do an update or actually change the server over if you do want to upgrade to 2022 and you are using Windows 7. So we wanted to make sure that that was clear. before that, because that's quite a big jump for sure. As well, if you do want to try out version 2022, it absolutely can coexist. Like, let's say you have a version 8 license server, things like that, or any of your database side of things. So if you are running version 8.12 and anything in that version history, you can run 2022. It can coexist there. But if you are using DNC-Max, it will only function with the same DNC-Max server as the client. So that version has to match up. So let's say you're using version 2022, you have to use a DNC-Max version 2022. Now there is we have increased the security on the password side of things as well. So if you do change your password for the login for DNC-Max, you can't revert back after that. So it's not backwards compatible here. Okay, so that was mainly the big housekeeping side of things, the big changes that we've made in the background there. I can jump into the actual meat of the presentation here, and let's hop into my server. I'll go ahead and minimize this out. All right, so what I really wanted to get into first was mainly on the licensing portion of everything. So in 2022, there is an option, and this has been a request for quite a while. So inside of our software manager in 2022, if you go into the configure section here, we now have an option, two options actually, inside of the license configuration to actually kick out specific users that are logged in, or actually completely block connections from the server as well. So if let's say I go ahead and I hit that block connections button, and let's say I close this out, the server is going to tell us that we're blocking any connections that come in. So if I try to edit or open up my editor, we're going to get a window saying that we're actually blocked for connections currently, and to reach out to your system administrator. So that's quite nice if you're doing some maintenance on the system, or you don't want anyone to pull it while we're doing any upgrades or anything like that. That could be a very helpful feature. But if I go ahead and unblock that, the server is going to tell us that we are back ready, unblocked, server open for connections, and I can then open up the Cimco editor. So just we're going to cover this a little bit later, but you can see that it does default to that dark view, which is a little easier on the eyes, which I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy here. But we can go over the configuration kick as well on here. So let's say you see it can tell that I checked out that license particularly. So if I just hit that kick button on here, a kick request is sent. Please allow up to 10 seconds for the kick to take place. And inside my editor, I'm going to get a warning message saying I've been kicked, and I have okay to save on all unsaved work, and it'll close out the editor for me. So now I have 4 out of 4 licenses available there. So I know that's, like we said, it's been a long time ask from the software side, especially on the IT management side of things. So being able to actually kick people out of the software is going to be really helpful if we have a license issue or something like that as well. So the next portion, I did want to go over some changes in the Cimco editor. We're going to go into kind of quite a bit of a deep dive on that section here. Mainly the big changes have been, and like we said, we are the 64-bit system here as well. So that's allowed us to actually really put a lot more firepower in the background of the backplot and the machine simulation side. So before we start on that portion of it, let's go into our global settings, which you might be pretty familiar with here. So we can see that right off the bat, our file, kind of our text looks a little bit different on here as well. It's a little bit more updated to the new Windows section here. Default, and I believe this was a setting in the later versions of the version 8 as well. But we do have a section in here on the client setting that we can say exit editor and save files when the software has been inactive. So let's say every 15 minutes you want to, if you stepped away from the computer and we're taking up that license, we can close out the software directly if that setting's on here after that specified time. So that's been another big ask that a lot of people have really wanted to. That's just dealing with different customers on installations. A big question has always been, can we close it out automatically? and that's available currently in 2022. We also have the setting to use the dark mode colors. We can completely turn that off and go kind of revert back to the initial settings here. So if I say OK, it's going to go back to the editor format that we kind of grown to know and love here. I keep my windows on dark mode just like Matt does as well. So I'm a big fan of the dark mode side of things. So just going over a few other housekeeping things on the Cimco editor side. A lot of this is going to stay the same. You know, you've got your file compare options, your load save, you know, if you have that file share that you want to load your files from here. The big change is going to be on our backplot settings and then the control settings here as well. So in our list, we've really kind of narrowed it down on the FANUC milling, FANUC turning. I believe there's going to be some development done to add a few bit more controls inside here. But let's say I'm in a FANUC turning environment and I want to backplot my file out. On the control settings here, we can actually choose, you know, what type of G-code system, what type of positioning I'm looking at. These are all the default values inside of here. But if your system's a little bit different or you're programming, you know, you're just a little bit differently than standard, we have the option to change up quite a bit of this in here. So it'll allow you to kind of edit your can cycles as well to really make sure that that backplot's giving us what we need here. Make sure I'm on my dark mode again. Okay, perfect. So there's a few options here. On the milling side, it's not as extensive, I would say. So on the UMC milling side, you know, there might not be the parameters that you can really edit too much. But let's say, you know, on FANUC milling, you know, you can ignore the block skips and choose to say true or false there. Another big feature that we included into 2022 is going to be our scanning section. So what that can do is if we're editing, you know, let's say a tool to be, you know, to pull that specific tool information here, we can adjust what our triggers are for that specific tool. And, you know, let's say the dimension keyword, things like that, and it'll give you an example of what we're actually pulling there. So we'll go over that a little bit more in the backplot section of everything. But we can also do things as well as we're going to kind of take a look here just in a second on the setup of your backplot and your machine simulation. We can actually write some of that holder, stock information, all that good stuff to the file, so we can actually use that at a later time and not have to set everything back up again. I won't go over too much else inside of the actual settings window here. I think we're actually pretty standard. It's going to be pretty much the same as what we have for version 8. These buttons here are actually pretty nice. If you do have, you know, let's say someone else has a really cool setup, you know, in your shop, and you want to import their settings file, you can go and import that if you have that saved somewhere on your desktop or, you know, wherever on your computer. You can also export that out like we saw as well. So I'm going to suppress back to dark mode here. So we'll go over a couple examples here. One's going to be just a normal 3-axis program, and then one's going to be actually a 5-axis, so we can see some of that tool motion displayed inside of the editor here in the backplot section. So first I'll go open and I'll open up this Pocket program that I've got. So if we try to backplot this, we're going to see a good example, and this is actually a Haas part, so I'm on the next gen milling section. If I choose to backplot that file out like we're used to here, I'm going to just zoom into my part file. I can see that, let's see, I'm going to move my bar over here. So we can see the program here, and we can also actually add some stock into this to see what the motion actually looks like inside the tool here. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can either do it through this button here, or you can right click and then add stock. And then you have the option as an STL file if you have in here, a cylinder, or a box. In this particular one, I'm going to do a box, and we'll do dimensions. So right off the bat, it's going to generate to the extents of the file. And in here, we have some options in the property section as well. So right now I can't see any of my tool path here. It's just going off of, some arbitrary extents inside of here. So I can actually adjust this to go, let's say maybe 8 millimeters down. So at that point, you've got a red X next to your stock rectangle, and you can see that our part file is shifted down a bit. Before we do that, I'm actually going to change my height, or my width and my length here as well. So I'm going to go to 90 millimeters, and let's go to 60 millimeters as well. So once that's all saved, I can go ahead and actually regenerate that solid to display that on the screen. And now we can see a good example of what our toolpath is going to look like inside of here. So as we go, we did have that setting on in our scanning section to actually save off that geometry to the actual program. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to, when we open this file back up again, it's going to let us have this all set up for us before we even do. We don't have to do it again, essentially. So I can right click and I could say save setup. And then in my file, you could see it's written all of this information here about our stock into the file itself. We'll see a little bit further on the 5-axis scenario to where it's going to be displaying your holder. It's going to be displaying different types of fixturing as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like in the backplot sense here. So if we zoom a little bit in, it's going to actually spiral down. And we could see that actually take the material off the part inside of the Cimco here. So let's say you're doing this backplot here and you realize that the tool's not exactly what we programmed it out to be. So let's say we need to edit that inside the software. So as you can see, it's leaving a few different marks inside of here, and that's based because we're using the wrong tool inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this, and we'll close out the backplot. And then what I'll do is I'll save this, so when we backplot again, we're going to have all of our stock set up already. So if I go and backplot that, we see a similar value for our stock. I'm going to move this out of the way. And that 60/90, and then the -8 translation is still in there from when we did that in the first part of it. So inside my file, you can see that I've got an 8 millimeter flat end mill as my tool that I'm using. So what we've done in the tool setup section, and this is actually very similar to your Mastercam tool editor, is we can actually go in here and edit the tool a lot easier than we used to before in version 8. So right now it looks like we're pulling a 4 millimeter flat end mill. If I wanted to edit that tool inside of here, I can go into here, and then the end mill flat, you can edit the holder, you can edit the flat. So I'll go ahead and hit this pencil icon, and that'll allow us to change that. So to match my file, I could say 8 millimeters, and I can go ahead and save that. We'll save this. And now we've got the tool set correctly as we have in our description for the tool. So now as we go, we can backplot this out again. And we can see we have that updated larger tool inside of there. So it's going to make it a lot easier for you to edit the tools as previously in Cimco Edit 8. Before, it was kind of a manual process of defining what that tool looks like, the holder, all that good stuff. So as this finishes out, that's going to do its last finish pass, and we can simulate that inside of here. So like always, we're able to save this toolpath out as a DXF. So it's been an option for years inside of Cimco, so we won't go over that. But all the main functionality of your backplot is going to be the same, just with a few improvements like we've shown here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this backplot out here, and we can look at a multi-axis scenario to show a little bit more about what the editor can do in the backplot sense. So I've got a part that's usually ran on a UMC 750, and it's a 5-axis. It's quite a large program, so we might not go over the full extent of the backplotting just for time's sake, but we'll go over a few things on here as well, just differences. Okay. So in the backplot section, just like we saw before, it is rating some of the values, the Pentagon setup. If you do have a setup file that you wanted to save off and reference, we can also pull from there as well. So it's scanning the file inside of here, and it's actually pulling what we're trying to do on a lot of these things. So if we backplot this out, and we're going to be on that next gen milling, it looks like quite a bit of motion that we're looking at just because it is a 5-axis part. But what we can do inside of the editor, and this has been available for quite a while. So on the toolpath section, you can choose to show the rapid moves, and you can choose to show any cutting moves as well. So all we're going to be seeing here is going to be just the machine taking off stock of the cylinder here. So it's going a bit fast, so I'll slow it down a little bit. What you're going to be getting here is we're actually, it's similar to what you're going to get in Mastercam inside of a simulation type of scenario, and we'll make a quick adjustment and we'll show some of the differences here. But what this is going to do, it's going to keep taking off material until we're kind of closer to our workpiece that we defined. So you'll be able to see the 5-axis motion once it's done with its second roughing pass here. This is mainly on an OptiRough section, it looks like here as well, or typical toolpath like that. So as we go, once we get into our 5-axis motion, I'll go ahead and slow this down so we can see that. Slow this down. We can see that tool holder start to tilt as we're trying to get into those particular areas of the part. So like we said, this is a very large program. I'm not going to bore you guys with the extents here, so I'll go ahead and stop this, and I'll close this out. But I did want to show you a little bit on what the backplot can do if, let's say, our part's not set up exactly correctly here. So just like before, I'm going to turn, just for ease of sight here, I'm going to turn off my rapids and turn off the cutting moves. So in my stock cylinder, I can adjust where I'm at. And let's say I go to, maybe 60 in Z on the translation of that stock. So like before, we got a red X near that. So we can regenerate that solid. And that stock cylinder is going to display here. So you can see a little bit on the bottom here, you can see our workpiece is still down a little bit, but our stock is not quite exactly where it needs to be inside of there. Let's say I go ahead and I backplot this out. If I hit play on this, you can see that we're going to get a red marking on the file because it's actually gouging what the stock part is actually cutting inside of here. So very similar to Mastercam, you're going to get a good gauge of where we're overcutting, where we're undercutting on these features inside of here. So right off the bat, if you get that red inside of the window here, you're going to know that, oh, maybe I need to adjust my stock back to what I had before. So I'll backplot this out. I can say, put that back to that 50.5 inside of here. So again, you can regenerate that solid. And then we can see we're back to normal on this as well. I would say as a good, point of action, we can just backplot that over again. And then we're going to be back to normal here. So it really allows you to have a whole lot more control with our geometry manager here than we did before in any Cimco backplotting scenario. So before you were just kind of going off of whatever Cimco gave you and adjusted it kind of manually there. With this, it makes it a lot easier, and we can even use some solid models here like we see as well. Another thing we did want to cover, we can actually display any visibility as well. So if you wanted a transparent piece of stock, if you wanted that stock completely hidden, or if you wanted to remove it, regenerate it, that same regenerate button is going to do the same thing here. And then we could save any setup files or STL files that we've got inside of here. You can also copy positioning as well, which is could be useful as well if you're using the same vise for different programs, for any maybe fixturing that we've got inside of that. So fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and close this guy out. I think we should be good on this. If anyone has any additional questions on this, or maybe if you have to want to try it out on your own system, we'd be glad to help you guys out by all means. I know this is quite a popular function inside of the Cimco Edit Pro, so a lot of you joining in the meeting can probably get some good use out of it here. So the last thing I did want to cover is going to be our MDC-Max, and that's going to be our data collection software. So I did want to show what it originally looked like and then how we've made the improvements on it here as well. So I'm going to kick out of my demo server right now, and I'll kick out of the PowerPoint. Now inside my Cimco on my desktop here, I still have version 8 installed. So I can go ahead and open up my MDC from before, and we can compare the two differences, or the differences between the two pieces of software. So if any of you are MDC customers, you're probably familiar with some of the live screens. We have, looks a little bit older of a layout here. The text hasn't really been updated too much to any new fonts, but we do have something called our web client, which a lot of you might be, if you are an MDC user, you're probably familiar with that. So inside of the web client is where we actually see quite a bit of visual improvement inside of here compared to what we see in the standalone software. So what we've actually done inside of the version 2022 is we've completely updated it. So if I log in here, the standalone client's going to look a whole lot more like the web client that we saw before. And a lot of this is based off of now that we're using that 64-bit system. So we're able to really kind of use a lot more firepower in the background to drive some of these live screens, our engine, the operator screens, all that good stuff. So one thing that a lot of customers, had some gripes with in the past potentially is on, the customization of things inside of Cimco. On the reports and charts section of things, and in the live screens is where we're going to get a whole lot more, functionality inside of here. So what it used to be in Cimco is we used to click on our live screen setup, and it used to show up as a tab inside of here in Cimco. So what you were doing, you really were kind of blind with the setup of everything. So I would have to save something, go back and check what my live screen looked like, and then go back and forth here. What I can do now is I can actually have this as a window. And let's say I wanted to edit, where my program was kind of sitting on the live screen. So let's say I wanted to push this in a little bit. Let's say I wanted the total job time to match up with that as well. So we now have this apply button inside of here that automatically will display what changes we've made inside of Cimco, inside of MDC-Max. It'll display the changes that we've made in real time. So you can make that process a whole lot easier of editing any screens to make it customized to what you want in your system. Typically, if you're not exactly sure what some of the fields mean, if you do utilize some of these options inside of here, we do recommend that you make a backup of everything before you make any changes. And And then what you can do with that is, in the backup configuration section, you can go ahead and back up everything now. So right now it's an MDC backup. Before it was a live screen backup, an engine backup, and a report backup. In 2022, it all consolidates everything into one file. So we can actually save this out. So let's say I do this and I make a change. Let's say I make a change to, let's say I completely get rid of my program section for some reason. Go ahead, apply that. And you can see that that value is not in here any longer. So if I wanted to restore any changes that I made, I can actually restore this configuration. And now what we can do inside of here is we can actually, let's see, I believe this saved out to, I go to demo files, shoot. Apologies, let me go ahead and back up that once more here. Okay, so it was in this showcase folder here. So if I go ahead and restore that configuration, and if I go to that location where my backup's at, so it'll ask you if I want to restore the live system and the report configuration, but I don't want to do that. I want to potentially just do the live configuration inside of there. If I wanted to restore that, I can go and say just the live section. And it'll only, so we're backing up to one file, but it's taking the live configuration of that entire backup and restoring that inside of here. So if I said yes to that, we can pull up our live screen again. We've got this back and ready here. So any changes that we make, we can revert back quite easily here. I did want to cover in a kind of just on a client settings side of things here as well. So we covered the option on auto logging off any clients for the editor. In the client setup of the MDC, we can also use that close program when inactive. We can go down to that 15 minutes or whatever value that you'd like inside of there. We can choose to remember any passwords, things like that as well. I believe that was a setting in V8. But this is actually all in MDC-Max here as well. So I've got my ports defined in MDC-Max. I can choose to configure that client. And I can use that close client when inactive button inside of here. It was already turned on. So a lot of where we're getting a lot of these new features is from that 32 to 64-bit operating system, giving us a whole lot more firepower. This is actually the largest upgrade to Cimco that we've seen in probably the last 2 decades at this point. So by all means, if you guys are currently on maintenance and want to try it out or anything like that, or if you want to get back on maintenance and we can, so you're able to utilize some of these features, by all means, if you guys ever need to reach out, feel free to email out to Cimco@shopwareinc.com or give us a call at our office, 888-222-7126. Matt, I think that's all I've got here. If you're all set.
We'll probably go ahead and end the webinar here. Again, appreciate everybody for attending. And again, just reach out if you have any specific questions or want to learn more about Cimco. But thanks again for attending. And thanks, Joe.
No problem. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Much appreciated.